$300.
Claire Voss said, resting one polished fingernail on the hood of Daniel Mercer's newly purchased truck. Storage fee. Pay it, or the Ford stays behind my gate. Daniel looked past her at the faded blue and white 1972 F100 sitting in pickup lane 3. His daughter Lily stood beside him with the auction release, folded in both hands. Behind them, the diesel engine of their old rollback idled, and its rear camera stared directly at the Ford. The release says 7 calendar days free, Daniel said. The auction ended 3 days ago. Claire smiled as if he had just admitted he could not read. At 42, she had turned one county yard into 6 auction locations. Her ivory suit did not belong among oil stains and chain binders, but everything inside the fence belonged to her until she decided otherwise. 7 days to arrange collection, she said. Storage begins after 48 hours. Different clause. Daniel did not argue. He walked to the Ford, lifted the hood 6 inches before a guard told him not to touch it, and looked through the gap. The air cleaner sat crooked. Fresh silver wrench marks shone on the carburetor nuts. When Daniel reached one finger to the throttle lever, it moved toward the firewall. On a factory linkage, it should have swept outward. He let the hood settle. Then he took out his phone, photographed the release, Claire, the gate clock, and the truck's position. If I pay, you give me an itemized receipt with the VIN, the dates, and the reason. Claire's smile tightened. You planning to sue me over $300? I'm planning to pick up my truck. Lily looked up at him. She was 16 and already knew the difference between her father being calm and her father being finished talking. Daniel paid with the garage debit card. He waited while the clerk printed the receipt. He read every line before he signed it. Then he asked the clerk to stamp PAID across the bottom. Claire laughed softly. A receipt won't make that old truck run. Daniel folded the paper once and put it in his shirt pocket. No. But custody is a kind of measurement, and measurements matter. He loaded the F100 onto the rollback without starting it. As the winch pulled the front tires up the steel bed, the rear camera recorded the truck, the gate, Claire's words, and the exact condition of the engine bay. Daniel did not yet know that the same video would also capture a young yard employee stepping into the background, seeing the crooked air cleaner, and going pale. Mercer Garage sat 12 miles outside Bellwether, Missouri, in the brick building Daniel's father had used for tractor repair. The sign had lost its M in a storm. Daniel had promised Lily he would replace it after winter. Winter had passed twice. The F100 was supposed to help. Daniel had paid $4,800 for it after studying the auction photographs and listening to the seller's 30-second engine video. It was not a treasure, and he did not expect it to become one. It was a straight, useful old truck with a strong 390 engine, a long bed, and enough honest wear that customers would remember it. Daniel planned to make it the garage parts runner, then let Lily use it for the vocational program at school once she earned her license. More importantly, it would replace the garage van whose transmission was shedding metal into its pan. Daniel had 3 weeks before a regional fleet customer decided whether to renew his service agreement. A reliable parts vehicle was not a luxury. It was the difference between accepting same-day repairs and watching those jobs go to a chain store in town. Lily guided the rollback inside, using flat palms and the hand signals Daniel had taught her. When the Ford touched the floor, she set wheel chocks behind both rear tires. You knew something was wrong at the yard, she said. Daniel opened the hood fully. I knew somebody had been in here recently. The engine bay smelled of old coolant, dust, and raw gasoline. The carburetor on top of the intake manifold was dark brown with corrosion. Its choke housing pointed at the wrong angle. A homemade bracket held the throttle cable in a shallow bend, and the fuel inlet had been forced to accept a brass adapter wrapped with fresh white thread tape. Daniel removed the air cleaner. Under it, the evidence became plain. 4 clean rectangles marked where a different carburetor's base had shielded the intake from years of grime. The replacement covered only part of that pale outline. 2 mounting nuts were new, 2 were old. A bright scratch crossed the manifold where a wrench had slipped. Lily leaned closer but kept her hands behind her back. That wasn't in the auction pictures. No. Daniel opened the listing on her tablet. The first engine photo showed a dull gold carburetor beneath a round blue air cleaner. It had a side-mounted choke pull-off, an original fuel bowl, and a small brass plug in the front metering block. The seller's video showed that carburetor feeding a rough but steady idle. The brown unit in front of them was an emissions-era replacement from a different application. Daniel moved its throttle lever by hand. The linkage reached full travel before the pedal could move halfway. Worse, there was no visible fuel spray from the accelerator circuit. He poured 1 teaspoon of fresh gasoline into a priming bottle, not into the carburetor, but through a short remote hose connected to a safe test reservoir. He disconnected the ignition coil first, checked for leaks, then had Lily turn the key for 2 seconds while he watched the fuel pressure gauge. The needle rose to 5 pounds. The pump worked. He reconnected the coil, kept the garage doors open, and told Lily to stand at the red line painted 10 feet away. He gave the engine 1 controlled prime and turned the key himself. The 390 fired on the first compression stroke, barked through the open choke, and died before the fan completed 4 turns. That brief answer was enough. The engine had compression. It had spark. It had fuel delivery to the carburetor. What it did not have was a carburetor capable of metering that fuel. Daniel switched off the battery disconnect. The truck didn't suddenly forget how to run. They changed the part. That's what the marks say. Lily looked toward the office, where unpaid invoices were clipped beneath a magnet shaped like a trout. Then we call the police? Daniel studied the pale gasket shadow. First, we make sure we can prove which truck, which part, and when. Anger is easy. Sequence is harder. He pulled the auction release from his pocket and set the $300 receipt beside it. The receipt listed the full VIN, the auction close date, the pickup date, and a line that read, "Secured vehicle storage, 3 days." Claire had charged him for exclusive custody of the very period in which the carburetor disappeared. Daniel photographed the fresh tool marks under white inspection light. He bagged a curl of new thread tape that had fallen beside the intake. He measured the clean gasket outline and wrote the dimensions on a shop tag. Then he stopped. The next obvious move was to remove the replacement carburetor. But doing that would destroy the untouched arrangement Claire could claim Daniel had created himself. He lowered the hood and ran a numbered wire seal through the latch. "You're not fixing it?" Lily asked. "Not yet. But we need the truck." "We do." Daniel looked at the silent Ford and then at the failing garage van. "That's the cost of keeping the evidence clean." The next morning, the van failed during a parts run. They lost a brake job to a shop in Bellwether and paid $85 to bring their own vehicle home. By noon, Claire had answered Daniel's written complaint with a 6-line message. The vehicle had been sold as is. Voss Premier Auctions did not guarantee the presence, originality, or function of any component. All lots remained subject to storage fees. Further defamatory statements would result in Daniel being banned from every Voss auction. Daniel printed 1 copy and put it under the receipt. Then he rolled a low stool beside the Ford and watched the auction video frame by frame. The original carburetor was visible for only 11 seconds. Most people would have seen an old gold-colored casting. Daniel saw a bent choke rod, 2 red paint dots on the rear screws, and a small half-moon filed into the throttle arm to clear an aftermarket cruise control bracket. Those were not factory features. They were scars. Scars could identify a part better than a serial number. He paused at the last frame. A narrow paper tag hung from the rear carburetor stud. Written in black marker were the last 6 digits of the Ford's VIN. Auction workers used those tags when vehicles arrived with loose or removed components. The tag meant the carburetor had been identified with this truck before the sale. Daniel magnified the image. The paper was greasy, but the digits were readable. Lily pointed at the timestamp. The video was made the morning of the auction, 9/18, and they charged us to secure it after that. Daniel nodded. The paper trail was closing, but it still did not show where the original carburetor had gone. He called Gus Herrera, the owner of the rollback they shared on alternate weeks. Gus had installed the camera after a driver falsely claimed that his car had been damaged during loading. 1 lens faced forward, 1 watched the bed, and a microphone inside the cab recorded conversations around the open driver's window. They reviewed the footage on the shop monitor. Claire's demand was clear. So was Daniel's request for a VIN-specific receipt. The rear camera showed the Ford's hood lifting as Daniel inspected it, the brown carburetor beneath the crooked cleaner, and the gate clock reading 10:42 a.m. Then Lily stopped the video. "Go back." Daniel reversed 8 seconds. In the far background, beyond the Ford's open hood, a young yard worker in an orange vest pushed a steel cart from the parts building toward a white van. On the cart sat 3 carburetors in shallow plastic tubs. One was dull gold. A paper tag fluttered from its rear stud. The image was too distant to read the digits, but the bent choke rod made a crooked silhouette Daniel recognized. The worker glanced toward Daniel, then toward a heavyset man beside the parts building door. The man chopped one hand downward. The worker covered the tubs with a black mat. Gus leaned toward the screen. That's Leonard Pike, runs their yard. And the kid? Jonah Rusk. Started last winter. Daniel played the clip again. The camera had not filmed the carburetor being removed, but it had recorded a tagged part matching the visible scars, leaving the secured area while Claire was charging Daniel for storage. It had also recorded Claire saying the Ford had not been touched after the auction. Everything she said, Lily whispered. And that cart. Daniel copied the unedited video to 2 drives. One went into the safe. Gus kept the other. That afternoon, Daniel drove the dead van to Voss Premier in 2nd gear. He parked outside the fence and asked to speak with Claire. Leonard Pike came instead. Leonard had the thick forearms of a man who had once done physical work and now preferred ordering it. He stopped on the other side of the locked pedestrian gate. "You received our response," he said. "I did. I want the carburetor that was on my truck when the auction closed. You bought a non-running vehicle as is." The listing video showed it running. Old engines quit. Old engines do. Carburetors don't change bolt patterns by themselves. Leonard's eyes moved once toward the parts building. It was a small mistake, and Daniel filed it beside the wrench marks. "You have until 5 to leave," Leonard said. "After that, I call trespass." Daniel placed a copy of the paid receipt against the chain-link fence where Leonard could see it. "This says you secured that VIN for 3 days. Leonard smiled without humor. "Then you should be grateful it wasn't stolen." Daniel folded the receipt and returned it to his pocket. "That sentence is going to age badly." He left before 5. For 2 days, Daniel worked around the sealed Ford while the garage van worsened. Every lost parts run added pressure. On Thursday morning, Voss Premier permanently banned Daniel from its auctions and warned him not to publish the footage. Lily wanted to post it immediately. "If we accuse the wrong person from a distant clip, we become what they say we are," Daniel told her. "We need the part, or a witness. You always make doing the right thing sound slower." It usually is. At 6 that evening, the side door opened, and Jonah Rusk stepped into the garage. He was 23, narrow-shouldered, and still wearing the orange Voss vest under a gray sweatshirt. His eyes went immediately to the F-100. When he saw the numbered seal on the hood latch, some tension left his face. "You didn't take that other carb off," he said. "No." Jonah set both hands on the edge of Daniel's workbench. The nails were black with yard dirt. "Mr. Pike says you swapped it yourself, says you're trying to make a claim." "Did I?" Jonah looked at the floor. "No." Daniel waited. "They call it recovery," Jonah said. "If a car comes in with a part that sells better alone, Pike marks the car incomplete after the auction. We pull the part, put on a core if there is one, and the buyer gets told it was sold as is. Alternators, factory radios, carburetors, sometimes wheels. Who told Pike to do it?" Miss Voss set the monthly parts target. She said dead inventory had to pay twice. Once through the auction, once through reclamation. Lily's expression hardened. Daniel kept his voice even. "Did you remove the Ford's carburetor?" Jonah shook his head. "I carried it. Pike pulled it Tuesday night. He put that brown core on so the intake wouldn't look empty. The gold one went into bin C14 with 2 others. A reseller named Tanner buys the bins Friday morning. Friday was less than 14 hours away. "Why come here?" Daniel asked. Jonah swallowed. "Because you looked right at me when they loaded the truck. My dad lost his transmission shop after a supplier blamed him for used parts they shipped as new. Everybody knew he was telling the truth. Nobody wanted their name attached to it. He took a folded inventory tag from his pocket. It was a carbon copy for bin C14. 3 handwritten lines described 3 carburetors. Beside the second line were 6 digits. They matched the last 6 digits of Daniel's VIN. Daniel did not reach for it. "Did you take that from the yard?" Jonah nodded. "Put it back." The young man stared at him. "It proves it. It also lets Pike say you stole company records. I won't ask you to commit another wrong to help me prove the first one." Jonah's face tightened. "Then what do you want?" "Tell the truth where it can be recorded. Show an investigator where the part is. Don't remove it. Don't touch it. If I do that, they'll fire me." "Yes." Daniel did not soften the answer. "I can promise I won't sue you personally for carrying the part. I cannot promise you keep that job." Jonah looked at the Ford, at the sealed hood, and then at Lily. "Pike made me print the storage receipt. Miss Voss watched me do it. She said buyers argue less after they pay something. Daniel finally held out his hand, not for the stolen tag, but for Jonah's phone. Call the state auction enforcement line. Use your name. I'll sit here while you do it. The call took 12 minutes. Jonah's voice shook for the first 3, and steadied after that. He described bin C14, the Friday pickup, the Ford, and the practice of charging storage while stripping sold vehicles. The investigator asked whether the parts were still on the property. Jonah said yes. When the call ended, he folded the carbon tag and put it back in his pocket. "Return that before your shift," Daniel said. Jonah nodded. At the door, he stopped. "There's something else. Pike heard you used to build carburetors for the county race teams. He's going to say the gold carb is generic and you planted the VIN tag." Daniel glanced toward the auction video frozen on the monitor. "Then we won't depend on the tag." After Jonah left, Lily leaned against the workbench. "How do you prove a carburetor belongs to one engine without the tag?" Daniel walked to a shelf and took down a square steel plate punched with different bolt patterns. "You let the metal remember." At dawn, State Investigator Ruth Delaney entered Voss Premier with a county deputy and an administrative inspection order. Daniel stayed outside the gate. He had not asked to be present, and Delaney had not offered. For 2 hours, nothing moved except tow trucks. Then a white parts van rolled toward the exit and stopped. Delaney opened its rear doors. Leonard Pike came out of the office, waving both arms. Claire arrived 6 minutes later in a black sedan. At 9:20, Jonah walked through the pedestrian gate carrying a cardboard box with his name written on it. He had been fired. He crossed the road to where Daniel and Lily waited beside the garage van. They found 31 tagged parts, he said. 7 had already been listed online. "The gold carburetor?" Lily asked. "Still in C14. Delaney sealed the whole bin." Daniel looked at Jonah's box. A pair of gloves lay on top of a dented lunch thermos. "You have somewhere to go?" "My uncle's couch." "I meant for work." Jonah gave a tired laugh. "Not after Voss tells every yard in the county I stole from her." Daniel handed him a business card. "Be at the garage Monday, at 7. I need someone who knows the difference between carrying out an order and checking whether it is right." Lily raised an eyebrow. The garage had barely enough work for Daniel. Daniel knew it too. Jonah stared at the card. "You can afford that?" "I can afford 3 paid trial days. After that, we both tell the truth." It was not charity. It was a cost Daniel chose with his eyes open. Claire crossed the road before they could leave. She had removed her suit jacket and rolled her sleeves once. Without the gate between them, she looked less like a magazine photograph and more like a person who had not slept. "You brought regulators to my business over a carburetor," she said. Jonah called them. Her gaze cut toward him. "After you coached him, I told him not to steal your paperwork." Claire turned back to Daniel. "Do you know what happens if Delaney freezes my auction license? 200 consignments miss their sale date. 40 employees miss payroll. Lenders call notes. This company is not a school lesson for your daughter." Daniel's jaw set at the mention of Lily, but his voice stayed level. "Then you should have protected it better than a $300 fee. Pike ran yard operations. I set revenue targets. I did not authorize theft. Did you authorize charging storage inside a free pickup window?" Claire said nothing. "Did you tell me the truck had not been touched?" Her eyes flicked toward the rollback camera. Daniel saw that she understood at last. Claire lowered her voice. "Call this a component dispute. I'll refund the fee, return the carburetor, and give you $10,000 in auction credit." $10,000 could replace the van and cover Jonah's wages for months. Daniel shook his head. "You can refund money. You can't buy a different sequence of events." Claire's face closed again. "Then make sure your truck runs before you build your reputation around it." She walked back across the road. By noon, Voss Premier publicly dismissed the claims as a dispute with a former employee and an unsuccessful buyer. Daniel's fleet customer, Carroll County Produce, postponed renewal rather than put 12 trucks in the hands of a garage being called dishonest. Daniel lost the work he had bought the Ford to protect. That evening, he sat on the running board with the shop lights off. Lily brought him a paper cup of coffee and sat beside him. The sealed hood was at shoulder height. "You could have taken the credit," she said. "Yes. Would that have been wrong if we used it to keep the garage?" Daniel rubbed the fold in the receipt through his shirt pocket. "Taking payment for silence isn't the same as being made whole. The next buyer would still walk through that gate." Lily nodded, but not because the answer solved their bills. She rested her shoulder against his. After a minute, Daniel switched the lights back on. "Get the borescope." I thought we couldn't break the seal. We won't. He guided a bore scope through a factory access hole in the inner fender. A crescent of blue gasket protruded beneath the brown replacement. The auction video had shown gray fiber under the original carburetor. Fresh blue gasket meant the substitute had been installed after the listing video. It also created a danger. The blue gasket was pinched inward across one secondary bore. If Daniel started the engine again, a torn piece could be drawn into the intake. He withdrew the bore scope and capped the hole. That eliminates a road test, Lily said, until the investigator releases it. So how do we get a mechanical climax if the evidence has to sit still? Daniel smiled despite himself. Lily had spent enough time around his work to know he distrusted conclusions that could not survive a test. We build the test before we get the part, he said. On Monday morning, Jonah arrived at 6:47. Daniel handed him safety glasses and had him sweep the carburetor bench before touching a tool. Their first job was not the Ford. It was an old school bus with a hot stall complaint. Jonah guessed fuel pump. Daniel connected a vacuum gauge, a clear section of temporary line, and a heat probe. They brought the engine to operating temperature behind an exhaust hose. Fuel pressure stayed steady, but vacuum dropped when the choke opened. Daniel sprayed a measured mist around the base plate. The idle changed. Vacuum leak, Jonah said. Daniel nodded. A test that changes one condition beats a guess that changes a part. They replaced a cracked spacer, not the fuel pump. The bus hot-started 6 times and held a smooth idle at 650 revolutions per minute. The number stayed with Lily. 650, she said. Is that what the Ford should do? With the right carburetor and the timing where it belongs. Daniel built a portable test stand from a spare intake manifold, a sealed fuel reservoir, a low-pressure pump, and a clear catch pan. It could check a recovered carburetor without altering the Ford. He also machined 4 soft aluminum locator buttons to compare the clean witness marks around the intake studs. Years of heat and clamping pressure leave tiny impressions. Combined with the filed throttle arm, red screw paint, and brass plug, the 4-corner pattern could identify the part without its tag. Jonah watched Daniel blacken the locator buttons with layout dye and press an old sample carburetor onto them. Pike will say you made the marks afterward, he said. That's why Delaney photographs the part before I touch it. Then she controls it between tests. What if the carb is damaged? Daniel looked at the sealed Ford. Then the engine test gets harder. The truth does not owe us a convenient condition. At 4, investigator Delaney called. She had authority to hold the seized components, but Claire disputed which items had been part of completed sales. An emergency license review would take place Friday morning at the Voss yard. Delaney wanted each complaining buyer to identify property and demonstrate, where possible, that the part corresponded to the sold vehicle. Claire had requested the review be closed to the public. Delaney denied that request because Friday's auction preview had already been advertised. Buyers and consigners could attend from behind a marked safety line. Daniel asked for one thing: permission to perform a controlled fit and engine test if the gold carburetor passed a leak inspection. Delaney agreed, provided a fire marshal observed, and Daniel submitted his procedure by Thursday. Paper opened the gate. A machine would have to finish the work. Claire tightened pressure the next morning. 3 parts suppliers called Daniel within an hour to say his 30-day accounts had been suspended pending review. Voss Premier routed thousands of dollars of business through those suppliers every month. Mercer Garage did not. Without account terms, Daniel had to pay cash for every hose, gasket, and bearing. He used the money reserved for the garage van's transmission to buy a fire-rated fuel cell, new lines, and 2 certified extinguishers for Friday's test. Lily watched him count bills at the parts counter. There goes the van. For now. What if we lose? Daniel put the change into his wallet. Then we lose having done a test nobody can call reckless. Back at the garage, they rehearsed with a spare carburetor. Jonah read each step while Lily logged pressure, temperature, idle speed, and restart time. The procedure caught a blocked accelerator passage and a leaking needle valve. The brown replacement then missed the locator marks by nearly a 1/4 inch, moved opposite the Ford's factory geometry, and delivered no fuel from its accelerator circuit. So the wrong carb can't pass, Jonah said. It can't even safely operate the truck, Daniel answered. That matters more than whether it looks old. Wednesday brought a setback. Delaney sent photographs of the gold carburetor from bin C14. The paper VIN tag was gone. Leonard claimed no tag had ever existed. Claire's attorney argued that the auction video was too low resolution to establish what had been written on the paper. Lily slammed her palm on the desk. Of course they removed it. Daniel studied the photographs. The bent choke rod was there. So were the red paint dots and brass plug. But something else was wrong. One rear mounting ear had a fresh crack. The carburetor had either been dropped or pried loose. If clamped normally, the crack could spread and pull air beneath the base. The engine might start, then lean out under load. A failed public test would let Claire say the part had never been on the running truck. Daniel enlarged the image. The crack ended just short of the bore. "Can you weld it?" Jonah asked. "Not before we know the casting alloy, and not while it is evidence." "Then Friday is over." Daniel shook his head. "A cracked ear changes how we hold it. It doesn't change what the passages do." He made a bridge clamp that would span the undamaged center section and apply even force without loading the cracked corner. It was not a permanent repair. It was a reversible fixture for one controlled demonstration. He lined it with fiber washers so it would leave no new marks. That night, someone threw a brick through the garage office window. It landed beside Lily's school backpack. Wrapped around it was a printout of Voss Premier's statement with the words, "Drop it," written across Daniel's name. The sheriff's deputy took photographs and the brick. No camera showed the road clearly enough to identify a vehicle. Gus offered to stay overnight. Daniel thanked him and said no. Then he moved Lily's desk away from the window and screwed plywood over the opening. "I'm not scared," Lily said. "I am," Daniel replied. She looked at him, surprised. "Courage is not pretending cost does not exist," he said. "It is deciding which cost you can live with." He called Delaney and told her about the brick. He did not accuse Claire. He also called the school and arranged for Lily to stay with Gus and his wife until after Friday. Lily refused. "I logged every test," she said. "I was at the gate. I'm a witness. You're my daughter first. And you taught me sequence matters. I'm in the sequence." Daniel looked at the plywood over the office window. For a long moment, neither moved. Finally, he made a compromise. Lily could attend the review beside Delaney's marked observation area, never inside the test boundary. Gus would stand with her. If Daniel or Delaney said leave, she would leave without argument. She held out her hand. Daniel shook it. Thursday afternoon, fleet owner Walter Caro came for his records and saw the sealed Ford. "Claire says you're turning an old carburetor into a Crusade," he said. Daniel pointed through the hood gap. "That linkage pulls backward and can bind. The accelerator circuit is dead. Whoever installed it made a running truck unsafe and non-running. Can you prove the other one works?" "Tomorrow if it does. If it doesn't, I say it doesn't." Walter nodded. "I'll be at the yard." The review began Friday at 9 beneath the steel canopy of Voss Premier's main auction lane. Rain rattled on the roof. Yellow barriers held nearly 60 buyers, employees, and consigners 20 feet from the test area. Delaney stood beside a table containing 7 sealed parts. A fire marshal checked Daniel's fuel cell and extinguishers. A licensing officer named Harland Beck carried a clipboard, but kept his eyes on the equipment. Claire arrived in a charcoal coat over her ivory suit. Leonard followed her, pale and angry. Her attorney whispered near her shoulder. Daniel's F-100 sat in the center of the lane with its hood seal intact. Gus had hauled it back on the same rollback. The rear camera was running again. Delaney opened the proceeding with 3 facts. The truck had sold Tuesday at 6:04 p.m. Daniel had collected it Friday at 10:42 a.m. Voss Premier had issued a receipt, charging him for secured storage across those 3 days. Claire's attorney objected that storage did not guarantee component condition. Delaney did not argue. She simply turned to Daniel. "Show us the vehicle as received." Daniel held the numbered seal while Delaney cut it. He lifted the hood. The brown carburetor sat exactly as it had at the garage. Daniel pointed out the clean gasket witness, the new mounting nuts, the silver wrench scar, the blue gasket crescent, and the reversed linkage. He did not call any one of them proof of theft. He explained what each observation meant and what it did not mean. "This unit was installed recently," he said. "It does not match the visible footprint of the prior unit. It cannot receive the factory throttle motion correctly. Its accelerator circuit delivered no fuel in a controlled test. Starting the truck with it installed would risk a lean backfire and possible throttle binding. I will not do that for a demonstration." Leonard spoke from behind Claire. "Because you know the engine is bad." Daniel looked at Delaney, not Leonard. "The engine fired on a controlled prime at my garage. Fuel pressure was 5 pounds. I stopped after less than 4 fan revolutions." The licensing officer checked Lily's log against the uncut camera file from the garage. Then Delaney brought the gold carburetor forward. Up close, it looked worse than in the photographs. Grease filled the casting texture. The rear ear carried a hairline crack bright enough to be recent. The VIN tag was missing, but a short strand of greasy paper remained trapped beneath the rear stud washer. Daniel did not touch it until Delaney removed the evidence seal and the fire marshal gave permission. He rotated the throttle arm. The half-moon filing cleared a bracket mounted on the Ford. The bent choke rod aligned with a dent in the air cleaner base. The two red paint dots matched their position in the listing video. The brass plug carried 3 shallow center punch marks visible in the first high-resolution auction photograph. Then Daniel set 4 transparent overlays against the carburetor base. Corrosion shadows and polished high spots aligned with the intake's clean witness marks at all 4 corners. On the cracked rear ear, a dark oval matched a rust bloom around the corresponding stud washer. Claire's attorney asked whether any old carburetor could collect similar marks. Similar, yes, Daniel said. This sequence, no. But fit is only identification. It is not function. He mounted the gold carburetor on the portable stand using the bridge clamp. He connected low-pressure fuel, placed the entire assembly in a clear catch pan, and raised pressure to 5 pounds. For 30 seconds, nothing leaked. He moved the throttle once. 2 clean streams of fuel shot from the accelerator nozzles into the test throat. A murmur moved through the buyer line. Even people who knew nothing about carburetors could see the difference between 2 precise streams and the dry brown unit Daniel had demonstrated on video. He held the choke plate closed, applied vacuum to the pull-off, and watched it open to the specified gap. He checked float level through a sight fixture. He then drained the carburetor, removed it, and returned it to Delaney. The unit is functional enough for a controlled engine test, he said. The cracked ear prevents normal clamping. My bridge fixture avoids that ear. This is not a repair, and I would not release the truck for road use this way. Claire stepped forward. You have identified an interchangeable part. You have not shown who moved it. And you certainly have not shown my company directed anything. Daniel nodded to Gus. The unedited tow camera video appeared on a monitor beside the lane. It showed Daniel arriving, Claire demanding $300, and the gate clock. It showed Daniel requesting the VIN-specific receipt. Claire's recorded voice said the truck had not been touched since the auction. Then the rear view showed Jonah pushing the cart. The gold carburetor's bent rod was visible above the tub. Leonard's downward signal was visible. So was Jonah covering the parts. Claire's attorney called the image inconclusive. It was, Daniel said, until the yard produced the part carrying the same physical scars. Jonah walked from the witness area to Delaney's table. He described Pike removing the carburetor, installing the brown core, and ordering him to move bin C14. He admitted carrying the cart. Then he explained Claire's monthly parts target and her phrase, dead inventory, has to pay twice. Claire stared at him. I meant unsold inventory. You said sold units were cleaner because buyers had already paid, Jonah replied. The buyer line shifted. Several people began checking their own release papers. Leonard moved toward the gold carburetor. Delaney stepped between him and the table. We are done with this performance, he said. That engine has not run under its own fuel. For all we know, Mercer ruined it after pickup. There was the final theory. Daniel had expected it. He asked the fire marshal for permission to proceed. The marshal checked the exhaust hose, wheel chocks, battery disconnect, extinguisher positions, and fuel connections. Then he nodded. Daniel mounted the gold carburetor on the Ford using the bridge fixture. He installed a new gray test gasket witnessed by Delaney. He connected the carburetor to the sealed temporary fuel cell, bypassing the truck's old tank. He adjusted the factory throttle rod so it moved freely from idle stop to full travel and snapped closed each time. He did not tune by ear alone. He connected a vacuum gauge, tachometer, exhaust temperature probes, and a timing light. Lily stood behind the yellow barrier with her clipboard against her chest. State the test, Beck said. Daniel faced the witnesses. The listing video showed this engine starting cold, idling, accepting throttle, reaching operating temperature, shutting down, and restarting after 15 minutes. We will repeat those conditions. Success is a stable idle between 625 and 675 RPM, manifold vacuum above 17 inches without fluctuation, clean throttle response, coolant temperature stabilized below 205 degrees, and a hot restart within 3 seconds after 15 minutes. And failure? Claire asked. A fuel leak, binding linkage, unstable vacuum, overheating, or failure to restart ends the test. She crossed her arms. Start it. Daniel checked the catch cloth beneath the carburetor one last time. Dry. He primed the fuel circuit with the electric pump until the gauge reached 5 pounds, then switched the pump off and watched for pressure decay. The needle held. He turned the key. The 390 cranked twice and fired. Its first idle was high on the choke, rough from 3 days of untouched ignition settings. Daniel watched oil pressure rise before he touched anything else. 48 pounds. He checked the bridge fixture for movement. None. As the engine warmed, the choke opened. The idle dropped past 900, then 800. At 700, it stumbled. Leonard smiled. Vacuum flickered between 15 and 17 inches. One exhaust probe showed the left bank running cooler than the right. Daniel did not reach for the carburetor screws. He shut the engine off. The crowd reacted with scattered whispers. Claire's arms loosened. Failed, Leonard said. He removed the distributor cap. A fresh, bright line marked one terminal. The rotor sat one position off, and the distributor had been turned to compensate. The engine could survive a short listing video, then lose stability as the choke opened. Someone had altered the engine so the stolen carburetor could be blamed on an already bad truck. Daniel compared the distributor clamp's clean paint bridge to the auction photograph. In the photograph, a white paint line crossed the clamp and intake in one continuous stroke. Now the line was broken by nearly half an inch. He showed Delaney before moving it. Pike, Jonah said from behind the barrier. Thursday night. He said if the buyer got another carb, the truck still needed to fail. Leonard pushed toward him. 2 deputies intercepted him before he crossed the line. Claire turned on Leonard. Tell me he is lying. Leonard's face went red. I protected the company. You wanted recovery numbers and no claims. I gave you both. Claire looked at the buyers, employees, and the monitor frozen on her face at the gate. Her pressure had become permission, then practice, all protected by a $300 receipt. Daniel reset the distributor to the original paint witness, verified initial timing with the starter turning and the coil disabled, then tightened the clamp. He replaced the cap and inspected every lead. One restart allowed, the fire marshal said. Daniel nodded. He turned the key again. The 390 fired and settled at 850 on the remaining choke. As temperature reached 160, the plate opened fully. Daniel adjusted only the idle speed and mixture screws on the recovered carburetor. The tachometer descended to 670, then 650. The needle held there. Vacuum rose to 18 inches and steadied. The exhaust temperatures came within 20 degrees of each other. Daniel opened the throttle to 2,000 RPM and released it. The engine climbed cleanly and returned to 650 without sagging. Rain hammered the canopy. Beneath it, the old Ford idled with the slow, even pulse of a machine no longer being forced to lie. At 201 degrees, the thermostat opened and temperature fell to 194. Daniel let the engine run another 5 minutes. Then he shut it down. Lily wrote the time in her log, 10:18 a.m. The 15-minute heat soak felt longer than the entire morning. Daniel did not touch the hood. Heat rose from the blue and white fenders. Fuel pressure remained within limits. The bridge fixture stayed centered. Claire stood alone now. Her attorney had moved several feet away to speak on the phone. Leonard sat in the back of a deputy's vehicle, not arrested yet, but separated from the test. At 14 minutes, a buyer called out the time. At 15, Beck raised one hand. Daniel sat in the Ford. He placed one foot near the brake, but did not touch the accelerator. The test required the carburetor to manage the hot restart without being helped. He turned the key. The engine caught in less than 2 seconds. The tachometer swung once to 800 and returned to 650. Vacuum settled at 18 inches. No fuel appeared in the catch cloth. No linkage bound. The temperature held below 200 degrees. Beck watched the gauges for a full minute before marking the test complete. No speech could have improved the sound of that idle. Walter Caro stepped from the buyer line and asked Delaney if he could inspect the gauge. She allowed him to the edge of the boundary. He looked at the steady needle, then at Daniel. "Bring my first delivery truck Monday," Walter said loudly enough for the other buyers to hear. "The fleet contract is yours if your terms haven't changed." Daniel shut the Ford down. "My terms changed." Walter waited. "No exclusivity. And Jonah works under my insurance as an apprentice, not as cheap yard labor." Walter looked at Jonah, then nodded. "Send it in writing." Before any official announcement, buyers asked Daniel to inspect photographs of their lots. 2 employees gave Delaney their names. A consignor demanded his keys, and the clerk brought out a box of duplicate receipts. Claire watched her authority drain across the wet concrete. Beck finally spoke. Pending a full audit, Voss Premier's auction license was suspended immediately. No new bids could be accepted. Sold vehicles could be released only under state supervision. The storage fee practice would be reviewed as an unfair charge, and every component record tied to a sold VIN would be preserved. Claire asked whether the day's auction could continue under another manager. Beck looked at the paid receipt in Delaney's evidence sleeve. This was issued under your policy and in your presence. The suspension follows the license holder. The paper Claire had treated as a victory now proved she claimed control over the days she tried to deny. Claire approached Daniel after the crowd began to disperse. Her coat was damp at the shoulders. The old Ford ticked as it cooled between them. I built this company from one gravel lot, she said. Pike told me parts recovery was coming from abandoned and unsold vehicles. I should have checked. Daniel did not rescue her from the sentence. She continued. I knew the storage language was deceptive. I approved it because the fees covered payroll in slow weeks. And when you complained, I chose to defend the policy before I looked at the truck. It was not a full excuse. It was, at least, specific. Refund every buyer you charged inside the free window, Daniel said. Return every identified part. Pay the employees while the license is suspended. Then, tell the state what you just told me. You think that saves the company? I think it tells you whether the company deserves saving. Claire glanced toward Lily. And the $10,000 in credit? Keep it. I don't bid on credit from people who can rewrite its value after the sale. For the first time, Claire gave a short nod without calculation. Your $300 will be refunded today. Daniel took the original receipt from his pocket. Send a new receipt for the refund. One corner of Lily's mouth lifted. The 6-week audit matched 23 removed components to vehicles sold through 3 Voss locations. Some were worth less than $200. The value did not decide the offense. Custody did. Leonard Pike was charged with theft and evidence tampering, after 2 employees confirmed he had ordered the distributor moved and the VIN tags destroyed. Jonah was not charged. Daniel kept his promise not to pursue him personally, and Delaney credited his cooperation. Claire surrendered the company's auction license rather than contest permanent revocation. She sold 2 yards to cover customer restitution and employee wages. The remaining property became a supervised vehicle storage business with no authority to conduct auctions. She did not emerge innocent, and Daniel never pretended she had, but she testified about the targets she had set and the warnings she had ignored. The fee was refunded with interest. After the evidence hold, Daniel had the casting alloy identified, repaired the cracked ear, resurfaced the base, and rebuilt the carburetor. The F-100 never became a museum piece. It did something better. It worked. Daniel rebuilt the brakes, replaced the dry tires, flushed the fuel tank, and repaired the worn steering joint over 4 careful weekends. Jonah handled cleaning and parts labeling, then graduated to measurements and supervised assembly. Lily logged every torque value and painted Mercer garage on both doors in cream letters that matched the roof. Carroll County Produce returned with 12 delivery trucks and a contract large enough to keep Jonah after his trial days. Daniel used the first payment to rebuild the garage van's transmission. He used the second to replace the missing letter on the sign. On a cool Saturday morning, Lily slid behind the Ford's wheel for her first supervised drive around the empty lot. Daniel stood outside with one hand on the open window frame. What do I watch? She asked. Oil pressure first, then temperature. Listen for anything that changes. She turned the key. The 390 started warm and settled at 650 RPM. Lily looked at the tachometer and smiled. Still holding. Daniel stepped back. The blue and white truck rolled forward in a slow circle. Not valuable because someone had discovered gold beneath its seat, but because every working part on it was now honestly accounted for. On the office wall, framed behind ordinary glass, hung the refunded storage receipt. Under it, Daniel had written one sentence for Jonah and Lily. Custody is a measurement. Then he picked up a wrench, opened the next work order, and listened as his daughter brought the old Ford smoothly back to idle.